Hello there, my name is Paul the Star Wars Guy, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. And welcome to video number 4 in my series of reviewing every single Star Wars movie that had come out. This video is, of course, about Phantom Menace, and as always, I'm going to be giving two different perspectives on this movie. What I thought of it the first time I saw it, and what I think of it now. So make sure to hit subscribe and like this video, and let's get right into it. So this is a very special movie for me. This was the first Star Wars movie I ever saw. I was 5 years old when I first saw it, of course had no idea what the original trilogy was, nor any of the expanded universe material that was out around that time. All I knew going into this movie was that it was a random movie set in space that Mom and Dad had rented for us to watch on VHS. But I remember seeing it and being absolutely mesmerized by what I was seeing in regards to the pod race, the fight in space to take down the droid control ship, and especially Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon in their fight with Darth Maul. Even though I really didn't understand at 5 years old what the story fully was, that was enough for me to be hooked on Star Wars like that, and of course, I loved the movie. And for the longest time, this movie was a strong contender, if not outright was, my favorite Star Wars movie out of all of them because it was the first one I had seen, though I will admit that that is a very biased way of looking at it. So I'm going to do my absolute best to be as unbiased about this movie as I can for this video, though there will be some instances where I can't help myself. So I want to start by talking about the various complaints that people have had over this movie over the years, which I didn't know about for the longest time until I was an adult and had joined the Navy and heard some of my Navy friends pointing out various things about the prequels and specifically about this movie that I had never considered before. And then I went back and rewatched this movie with all of those things in mind and saw them and was like, okay, I can see where people wouldn't like this. So what do I think of the movie now? First off, I do still very much love this movie and will always love it because it's the first that I've seen, but I will not let nostalgia nor bias blind me to this movie's faults, which we're going to get into. So let's start with the story. The Phantom Menace, people have complained, has a very overcomplicated story in regards to the introduction of taxation of trade routes, the Trade Federation, talk of blockades, of signing treaties, of votes of no confidence, etc., etc. And I do agree that in hindsight we know that this was the start of Palpatine's plot to ascend to the rank of Chancellor and ultimately become Emperor of the entire galaxy. And I think that they could have shown Palpatine's rise, especially in this movie, a little bit smoother than they did in real life. I think instead of showing, if I was to do this differently, I would have had Palpatine start out perhaps as a local official. Like maybe he was governor of Naboo with Queen Amidala, but he somehow assassinated the senator for Naboo of that time. We'll just make someone up. And he took over the role of senator, and no one suspects him, but at the same time, it just feels off that he has this role when he's not supposed to. And then from there, he either knows the right people or continues assassinating people, getting higher and higher up in the chain of command of the Republic until he eventually becomes Chancellor. And then from there establishes the Empire, of course, in the wake of the Clone Wars. But even with what we got instead of that, I still think suits Palpatine's character very well as someone who's very conniving, very slimy, is more prone to pulling the strings behind the scenes of both sides, framing the Trade Federation as the public enemy, yet in the ear of Queen Amidala, and setting people different places in the Republic to make Chancellor Valorum appear weak and eventually lead to him getting kicked out of office and Palpatine capitalizing on that and him becoming Chancellor himself. It makes Palpatine seem like a very smart villain, though I will agree that perhaps all of the stuff involving the Trade Federation may not have been necessary. Now, on to Jar Jar Binks. Jar Jar Binks has been made out to be the scapegoat for why so many people don't like the Phantom Menace. They sort of distill all of what they don't like about the Phantom Menace and place it on Jar Jar Binks, saying at best he is a character just made to sell toys to children as harmless as comic relief, or at worst, he's a racial stereotype. Now, on the subject of him being a racial stereotype, I have thought about this every which way to Sunday, and frankly, I can't see it. I don't see where they get these claims of Jar Jar being a racial stereotype from. Is it the way that he talks funny? Is it the way that he is the comic relief? Maybe it's just me being naive, but I've seen this movie hundreds of times by now, and I still can't understand where they're coming from with saying that Jar Jar Binks is playing a racial stereotype. But as far as the claims of him being a comic relief character meant to sell toys to children, no duh. And it worked with me because I don't mind Jar Jar Binks. In fact, I used to have, growing up, a little hand puppet of Jar Jar Binks. It was his head, his arms, and his torso, and it was made of rubber, and you stuck it on your hand like that, and you could make him talk. And I had fun with it. In fact, I think I still have it somewhere in my parents' attic. I'm going to have to look for that. But yeah, this is where I'll admit that my bias comes into play, because I see Jar Jar Binks as mostly harmless. Though I will agree that there were certain things that Jar Jar Binks did that are pretty annoying on a repeat view, such as all the things involving the poop jokes, the fart jokes, the needless slapstick in Watto's, junkyard shop, and on the battlefield. I think they could have still had him be comic relief, but they could have made him a little bit more dignified. And on the subject of Jar Jar Binks, I think that's absolutely a shame that the actor that played him faced so much hate because of the character that he revealed that he at one point considered suicide. No actor should ever have to face that. And speaking of actors that got made fun of because of the character that they played, Jake Lloyd as Anakin Skywalker. He is another tragic story of someone that got made fun of because they played a character that people didn't like. And even though, to my knowledge, he never considered suicide, he did eventually get arrested as a grown-up, I think, for domestic abuse involving his mom. And that's equally as sad, in my opinion. But as far as Anakin Skywalker himself and how Jake Lloyd played him, I was watching the Echo Base Network stream this past Saturday, and it was Nick talking with Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett. And I remember Mr. Burnett talking about how he would have showed Anakin much differently in this movie instead of what George Lucas gave us. He would have had Hayden Christensen play Anakin throughout all three movies, and he would have shown Anakin to be a little bit older than a 9-year-old boy in Phantom Menace, and he would have had him be a little bit more angsty, a little bit more selfish, a little bit more dark, so that you could actually see that this little boy could grow up to be one day the most feared person in the galaxy. And while I certainly respect his opinion, I think that showing Anakin as this young little innocent boy that just wants to help people, wants to free the slaves of Tatooine, and wants to become a Jedi to do so, just makes his eventual fall to Darth Vader even more tragic, showing that even the most pure and innocent spirit can be corrupted if they let these selfish and negative thoughts in, as we see happen in episodes 2 and 3. And then finally, complaints that people talk about is the midichlorians and the CGI. Talking about the CGI, again, this is where I'll admit that my bias comes into play here, but the CGI in this does not bother me. Granted, it does look a little bit dated. It's not the best CGI out there, but again, I really don't have anything bad to say about the CGI other than that. It doesn't bother me. And then finally, the idea of the midichlorians. I will defend the midichlorians till the day that I die. I like the concept of the midichlorians that George Lucas introduced, though I think it could have been explained a little bit better. See, I like the midichlorians because it is a great explanation for why only certain people can feel the Force and can use the Force. Basically, at least my interpretation of it is, the more midichlorians you have, the stronger potential you have in the Force, and with training, you can, use the Force to a great mastery of skill. And without the idea of the midichlorians, how come we don't see people like Han Solo using the Force? How come we don't see people like Padme using the Force? How come we don't see people like Lando using the Force? I don't think it's just an issue of they were never trained to use the Force. I think it's that they just simply do not have the ability because they don't have enough midichlorians. And I know that, and this is another thing that Mr. Burnett talked about, that he preferred the idea of the Force being, as Obi-Wan put it in A New Hope, this energy field that surrounds us, penetrates us, and binds the galaxy together. But now George Lucas has introduced this idea of these microbiotic beings. And at least my interpretation of that is he feels like the idea of the midichlorians almost replaces the idea of the Force being this great mystical energy that is just around us. And if I have misquoted anything, if Mr. Burnett sees this, please tell me. But the way I see it, why can't it be both? Why can't it be that the Force is this great energy field, as Obi-Wan says, and the midichlorians are just the conduit that we feel and interact the Force with? Why can't it be both? And for that reason, I think the midichlorians are a great idea. I would have loved to have seen them expanded upon a little bit more, which they did a little bit in episode 3, but I just wish that we had gotten more of that. And that's pretty much it as far as complaints that people have had about the Phantom Menace. So now that we've got the negative stuff out of the way, I can talk about the stuff that I do legitimately like about the Phantom Menace. So, talking about the casting, I think everyone in here was again cast to perfection. Yes, even Jake Lloyd. Though I don't think everyone did the best at their acting, and I don't think that's entirely their fault. I think it was George Lucas's writing, which I will agree is pretty cringy, and just the way that they were told to deliver those lines, perhaps. But sticking with the positive, I think especially Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and Palpatine played their roles to absolute perfection. Granted, I think Ewan McGregor did a better job as Obi-Wan in Episode 2 and especially Episode 3, but the way that he did Obi-Wan in Episode 1 is part of the reason why Obi-Wan, specifically the Ewan McGregor version of Obi-Wan, is my favorite Star Wars character of all time. I liked how he played this young, naive Jedi Padawan that's very by the book and doesn't always agree with his master's more loose interpretation of what a Jedi should be, though we know now that Qui-Gon is very much the epitome of what a Jedi should have been, just following the will of the Force instead of the traditions of the Council. And bringing to Qui-Gon himself, I think Liam Neeson play that even better than possibly Ewan McGregor played Obi-Wan. I think Liam Neeson absolutely excels at these quiet, calm, mentor-type roles that he does, be it Qui-Gon Jinn, or Aslan from the Disney Narnia movies, or as Ra's al Ghul in Batman Begins. I think Liam Neeson was absolutely born for those roles. And then moving on from that, Samuel L. Jackson, even though we get more of him and see more of him in episodes 2 and 3, I think he played a great senior Jedi Council member in this movie. Yoda, of course, is great as always. The version of this movie that I saw had the CGI Yoda instead of the puppet, which, again, I don't mind. And Darth Maul, played, of course, by Ray Park. He did a great job as this silent, brooding, assassin who was the apprentice, of course, to Darth Sidious, that could go absolutely crazy on the battlefield with his double-bladed lightsaber, which is still a strong contender for my favorite lightsaber design of all time. And I've already talked about Ian McDiarmid as Palpatine with Return of the Jedi, but again, I think he did a great job here, even if his plot, I think, could have been smoothed out a little bit better. I think Ian McDiarmid did a great job of playing this corrupt politician that's just trying to worm his way into the top of the government. The only thing really negative that I have to say about the actors and how they played their roles is I'm not the biggest fan of Natalie Portman and Keira Knightley's take on Queen Amidala, just because I think that through the way that they talk, they just sound a little bit too unnatural, a little bit too robotic for me. But that's just my opinion. I think they absolutely looked the part. And as far as what they were given to do in the movie, they did great. It's just their manner of speaking that kind of turns it off for me. And then the action, like I said, I really liked that. I liked the pod race, number one. I don't know if you really consider that action, but I think that was a great way of showing Anakin and his abilities, his quick Jedi reflexes, how he's able to pilot such a craft as a pod racer that goes so fast, later showing how he's able to pilot the starfighter that he uses in Naboo to ultimately, somewhat accidentally, take down the droid control ship. And then, of course, the gunfight in the palace, trying to retake that, was pretty entertaining, especially seeing how they were able to pull themselves up to the next level with grappling hooks attached directly to their guns. How they didn't break their arms out of their sockets doing that, though, is a big question for me. And even though I think of those 4 simultaneous action scenes between the saber duel, the gunfight in the palace, Anakin in space, and the Gungans on the battlefield, even though I think the Gungans on the battlefield is the weakest of the 4 action scenes, it was still pretty cool seeing how basically George giving us a different take on this idea of these very primitive beings being able to take on a much more technologically superior army and ultimately winning, though with some outside help in this case. And of course, what can I say about the lightsaber fight between Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Darth Maul that hasn't already been said? It is just an absolute masterpiece of action. It may not have all the psychological stuff that I like with the Return of the Jedi fights, but pure action, this pretty much set the standard for me, being the first lightsaber fight that I had seen, and pretty much the lightsaber fight that I judge all other lightsaber fights by as far as action goes. And of course, accompanying this, making it even better, being John Williams' work with Duel of the Fates. John Williams, of course, is a master composer, but I wholeheartedly believe that Duel of the Fates is his best work ever. Better than the main Star Wars theme, better than the Imperial March, better than Indiana Jones, heck, even better than Superman. I think Duel of the Fates is the best thing John Williams has ever done. So all of that being said, what do I ultimately think of Star Wars: The Phantom Menace now? Well, talking as unbiased as I can, I do still very much love this movie and always will, but I am not blind to the faults that it has. And like I said, a lot of the things that people have brought up that they don't like about this movie, I can certainly see why they don't like it, and even to an extent agree with them on some cases. Though as a whole, I do not believe that this movie deserves all of the hate that it gets. Heck, that's pretty much how I feel about the prequels in general, and we'll talk about episodes 2 and 3 specifically at another time. But until then, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, hit subscribe and like this video if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys when I talk about episode 2. Thank you very much.